lot of times I think the problems and trials that we have in our lives can easily be overcome if we kind of separate what's emotion and what's actuality. So much of our negative responses come from emotional responses and not necessarily the decisions we would make when we are able to think things out. I just want to read this really quick. And it's by a guy named Holbrook George Jackson. Only 1/4 of the sorrow in each man's life is caused by outside uncontrollable elements. The rest is self-imposed by failing to analyze and act with calmness. I didn't have an uncle who brought me into politics. I didn't have a family member. So my reputation and my name was all based on what I built. And that the basis of it was just me always being honest. I'll tell people the honest truth, even if it's bad, even if it hurts. And my philosophy on it is, if you don't like the truth, figure out a way to change it. When people know that they can come to you, whether it's good or bad news that you're going to give them, but that you'll be honest, I think it just builds this level of credibility to where your words actually have value. And so as young leaders, I think creating that space where your integrity is strong and people know that what you're going to say is going to be the truth. You don't have to say it mean. You can find nice ways to say unpleasant things. But again, staying centered on the truth is one of the things that I value deeply. As long as you have a good moral compass, you will guide yourself to the right place. I mean, sometimes, money drives people but at the end of the day, if you can't look at yourself in the mirror, then you should probably not be doing what you're doing. I have 2 kids. I have an 11-year-old and a 3-year-old. And so everything I do, especially in a professional space, has to be okay with them and has to be beneficial to their future.
A lot of the times the people that we don't get along with, it's really hard for us to listen and, really hear what they're saying and be open to it. It's one of the things we struggle with. Do you have advice on how to be able to really listen, be open, and connect with people that we don't necessarily see eye to eye with or agree with?
My advice on that, so I'm dealing with something like that kind of with around politics and some family members. So a lot of us probably are right now. So what I always tend to do is to try to understand their perspective, even if I know I don't agree with it, right? Because if you understand why and how somebody's thinking, you can usually negotiate to something that's reasonable. Something that some of my colleagues in the Capitol used to tease me about was every morning. So politically, I'm really progressive, like really, really progressive. But on the way to school or work in the morning, I always listen to conservative talk radio because I really want to know how they're viewing this world and what am I viewing so differently and why. Because there's always a chance that what you think or view is wrong. And so understanding both sides of it lends yourself to be in a place where you can actually affirm that you're right or acknowledge that you are wrong. Because, the way our media is set up with social media and algorithms that control what you see, hear, and don't see and hear, it's really important to understand that, like, you could be wrong. And so when navigating situations like you described, I always try to understand the other person's point of view.
Thank you for having this leadership dialogue with us today. You mentioned earlier about how having communication is very important. And especially now during the pandemic, it can be easy to establish relationships, but it can be hard to maintain them. So do you have any advice on how we can keep up with the connections we have and maintain those relationships?
I think the key is really just staying connected. I think like we're all kind of, depending on to what level we're social distancing, we're all kind of losing certain connections and missing people. And sometimes it becomes an out of mind, out of sight thing. So I think you just need to be intentional about connecting with people, especially, and it's not always about our own mental and personal health on this stuff. It's actually, if you know people who are typically alone or have one or two friends or whatever, or family members who live alone, it's actually important to be intentional about taking care of those people too. Because something I've learned in my life is when I do true altruistic things, just because I know they make somebody else feel better, the self-serving thing is they always make me feel better too. And so just, being intentional about connecting with people and knowing that this, like, for example, in this era or this pandemic situation, it's going to end. And keeping, it gets hard. Sometimes we struggle, but knowing that it will end, I think, and keeping your focus on like, hey, there's going to be a life after this is key.